I really thought that I'll be able to keep myself from talking about Neverwinter Nights at least till I'm covering the second game, but I just finished my latest playthrough that I did pretty much simultaneously with recording these videos, and there were some things that I thought were worth mentioning even if I did another with Neverwinter Nights one with just sole focus on my impressions and my thoughts on the DLCs and the original campaign. It may sound like I no longer love the DLCs as much as I used to prior to this last playthrough, but that's not the case at all. Since I wouldn't talk about them, I wouldn't make another video just to mention these findings of mine. It's just that I was able to look at them differently, and they allowed me to appreciate the original campaign even more. And I'm really grateful and glad that I started recording these, since thanks to that I was able to enjoy this game that's very dear to me in an entirely different way, in a rather special way. As I was going through this last playthrough, instead of just focusing on the experience, the enjoyment, I was able to notice the writing, the story, the characters, the highs and lows of the original campaign in a way that I not not straight up ignored, but maybe glossed over um, in favor of the whole package of the game. And the more I did that, the more I took notice of me doing so, the more love and respect I felt for the original campaign, especially compared to the DLCs, to the first one that I played for the first time in its entirety. It wasn't bad. I said that when I was covering the DLC, but I'm not going to be replaying that one, I think, at all. And when I compare the original campaign to the second DLC, it's still, for me, such a difference. There are so many things that just don't really click with me as well as I thought that they did in the second DLC. The biggest problem by far was the writing. It felt amateurish, childish. Some parts felt like a wish fulfillment of sorts, especially with the romances that are more important in the DLC, or not exactly that. It's more like that they are emphasized even to the detriment of the story as a whole. The evil options feel almost cartoonish, as in the options that the player can choose in conversation they just felt so over the top compared to the original campaign, and the delicate balance, the complexity of the choices, the side quests, the consequences of those choices. I mentioned some of those, the escaped prisoners quest, that was almost entirely grey, or the Shaldrisa quest that also had this. The options are not just black or white, they are in the grey area. I think it may have been that the writers tried to put more importance on the alignment system that was developed in the first DLC, maybe to make the choices more distinctive, but even the original campaign had this evil or good in some of the solutions, but it was much more intricate. The DLC felt downgraded, as if the beauty of the choices the original campaign offered just wasn't enough. It wasn't obvious enough, so they felt the need to differentiate it even more, and to me that felt like the wrong choice. It's just that the original campaign did not really have those numerical values changing, so it had to show the consequences in the writing, not just with a change of +5 good or +5 chaotic. And the writing quality felt especially apparent in the relationships with the henchmen, namely the romances in the Hordes of the Underdark. The Aribeth one was, I would say, downright criminal, since in the original campaign, first we learned about her as a character, both during the search for the cure for the plague, and then when we were trying to find the traces of the cult that was behind the plague. In the Arabeth's tale, where we became someone she thought she could trust and confide to, and only at the very end of the game, the original campaign itself, after confronting her as a fallen paladin and then ultimately bringing her back thanks to the ring she gave us as a memento that we kept through the third chapter, we were able to pull her back from the dark side, and finally, before the confrontation with Morag, we confirmed our feelings to each other after 4 long chapters and great character development. We were we knew her as a character, as a not exactly living being, but as close to that as possible in this sort of media, before we begin anything like a romance. But in Hordes, we aren't even playing the same character canonically, story-wise, even if we import the character from original campaign. We meet Aribeth for 1 chapter out of 3 of the second DLC, and by the end of that, we are eternal companions, and even she allows a second relationship ongoing with the Dark Elf Nathira, and that just really felt like some sort of teenage wish fulfillment self-insert, the more I thought about it, but I don't hate it, obviously. But now when I thought about it properly, it was clear to me that something changed. It felt the same with the henchmen from the original campaign in the Hordes of the Underdark that we can travel with through the first chapter, Linu and Sharvin. Their personal quests added a lot of depth to their characters. Their conversation felt like they were with an actual being, not just with some sort of template. And even they can somehow show close relationship towards the protagonist by the end of that entire game. Compared to that, the Hordes of the Dark characters, they just feel empty. And that's considering the fact that the original campaign was supposedly made in a great hurry, um, just to meet a deadline, since they finished the tool set first and then they realized they don't have a campaign for it. At least that's what I read. I obviously don't know the true behind it, but there was supposedly some sort of a deadline that they had to meet, and the campaign was rushed, which there were some hints that might have been the case. But I just want to know what happened during the development of the DLCs, if it was an entirely different team, or if just the writers were different, if it was even a team of writers or just one person doing both the original campaign and then another person doing the DLCs. Again, I have to emphasize that I don't hate the DLC now. I still love it. I still am going to replay it multiple times as I'll be replaying the original campaign. But even such characters, supposedly important, like the Seer in the second chapter of the Horse of the Underdark, it's empty character. It's just a quest giver, nothing else. It's not nothing even close to Aribeth or Aringant or even Lord Nashar. We meet him literally twice during the game, and the second time is during the last chapter. And even some of the side quests, the characters involved in them had so much more depth to them than even the main characters of the DLC. Even the first supposed main quest giver, Drognan, we know nothing about him at all compared to what we know about the quest givers from the original campaign through all four those chapters. The difference is insane. Another thing is that the timeline of the DLCs, especially of the second one, it just feels insanely rushed, even in the in-game time. I don't mean just that it's short or something like that. That's not exactly true. It still takes quite a lot of time to finish the second DLC, but the time frame during which it happens, just it's so small. And the chapters don't even feel properly connected. There is just some sort of a string tying them all together, but that's all. They just feel like they could be separate and it wouldn't make a difference. And a very large portion of the Hordes of the Underdark was borrowed from Baldur's Gate 2. The entire Underdark section was straight up copied. Uh, Same thing with the interaction with the vampires. It was literally the same mobs as from Baldur's Gate 2. At least the way the Dark Elf Nathira was handled well, probably the best out of all the characters in the second DLC, and it was still coming short compared to any of the main characters of the original campaign. All in all, it just makes me happy. It makes me admire the people behind the writing of the original campaign. I am really in awe. I actually might look a bit more into this just for my own pleasure, since, well, Neverwinter Nights is one of the most influential pieces of media in my life, and well, this is really an entire Neverwinter Nights video, but I regret nothing. Um, I even feel like during this rant I still forgot to mention some very important things, but maybe they'll pop out later on, and maybe I'll make another random Neverwinter Nights video. There are still some things that I want to mention, namely that there's. I'm not trying to say that the original campaign was flawless in any way, but I was definitely misremembering the Hordes of the Underdark. I thought it was way better than that I actually think now after the latest playthrough. But even then, it still gave a canonical conclusion to a great story, since the second game is not a sequel. It just happens in the same universe. But Hordes of the Underdark is the end of the first Neverwinter game. It at least brings some sort of closure to the characters, and especially to one of my favorite characters of all time, which is Aribeth. She is definitely on par with Viconia from Baldur's Gate. Probably Bastila from Knights of the Old Republic is there somewhere, and Jaheira from Baldur's Gate as well. Great characters, but still Aribeth is very special for me. And as far as I know, it was something that was very much requested by the fans. But at the end of the original campaign, that Aribeth gets some sort of a closure, some final um, adventure, something that would describe how her life went after what happened in Neverwinter. One more thing that I found out is that we got to know the villains quite well during the original campaign, way more than in the DLC. We got to know their ambitions, their backstory, the reasons for their action through both journals and conversations with them. In the second DLC, they just feel empty. Uh, the biggest, baddest villain of them all, Mephistopheles, the devil, just wants to rule the other devils, and that's all for the reason why he tempted to conquer the realm of Neverwinter and Waterdeep, why he even attacked them. Same with the Valsharess, the Mother Matron. She just wanted to rule them all. That was all we were able to gather from the conversations and some snippets of some tattered notes we were able to find during the second chapter. But that was it. That was all. I figured out that there may have been some similar time constraints put on the development of the DLCs, some deadline that cut short the development time, but even if that was the case, the writing is just so different. It feels like an entirely different person made the story for the original campaign and for the DLCs. It's just that the situations are resolved in such two-dimensional ways in the Hordes that it feels like a lot of wasted potential. Because again, I love the second DLC. The game mechanics are great. The premise is fine. It's fun. It's meeting again great characters that I was introduced to in the original game. So I would love that pretty much no matter what they did, and I still do. But I just thought that it could have been better. It's straight up Aribet's second or third conversation with the protagonist where she's flirting with him after he loses his armor to a mimic chest, and he's now half naked, and she jokes with him about paladins marrying and loving all the time, and it's literally right after a conversation that was about Dester's and Fantic's death and her betrayal of Neverwinter. It just absolutely did not make sense, and I have missed that in all of my previous playthroughs. And only now, when I was focusing on stuff like this, I noticed these discrepancies. It almost feels as if someone on the DLC's writing team thought that since people love the romance, the heavy focus on them in Baldur's Gate game, specifically the second one, they thought it might be a good idea to somehow shoehorn them into the DLC as well. But where the original campaign to the entire game to develop the relationship between the protagonist and Arbeth or the henchman. In the DLC, it takes snippet of that time. I would love to be able to talk about this with both the writers from the original campaign and from the DLC. Obviously, not with any malicious intent or anything like that. I would just love to know what's going on, who was making decisions, why were they making them. So I might actually look deeper into this. It's now quite interesting to me. There are just some pacing issues. I don't want to, and I'm not even able to properly categorize them precisely. That's why I'm all over the place. I'm jumping from one point to another. But one last thing would be the true names that were introduced in the second DLC, and even names of your true love that somehow dictated uh, something, and you were even able to use those true names to force characters to do things they would normally not do, as in forcing Aribeth to forget her guilt over what she did in Neverwinter and her betrayal, or or force Nathria to forget her past as an assassin. And during the last fight, the last confrontation with Mephistopheles, there was a chance they would betray you, these companions, if you did not use their true names to bind them to your cause, or have a high enough persuasion skill, which I still feel is better, but the true names and the implications behind them, now they feel wrong. They may make me feel quite heavy discomfort. So that was probably the last thing I wanted to mention in this video. It's so long, and I'm so glad I made it. I am again almost positive that I somehow forgot something, so I'll probably come back to Neverwinter Nights 1 again. But for now, I finished my playthrough very happily. And on the other hand, I'm a bit sad because another great adventure is over. I'll have to play me some Baldur's Gate or Knights of the Old Republic next, so that I don't grow too weary while making Asterix videos that are actually making me again very happy because Asterix is fun. It's just pure, it's innocent, and it's fun. And that's really the end of this video.